It is exactly 4:15 on a cold Tuesday afternoon in November 2011 in South Bend, Indiana. The sky outside Hager Hall has the flat, wet sheen of a galvanized bucket, and a damp wind is pushing through the gaps in the storm windows of a craftsman bungalow on Park Avenue. Inside, a 62-year-old retired structural draftsman named Arthur stands at his kitchen counter. He is holding a small brass cabinet knob that has worked itself loose from the sideboard drawer. To fix it, he needs a very specific tool. A short, narrow-bladed brass flathead screwdriver that lives in an old blue tin of Dutch butter cookies on a shelf in the far corner of his basement workshop. Arthur turns, walks 6 paces down the hallway, opens the heavy basement door, and steps onto the top landing. He descends the 12 wooden steps, his shoes making a dull, hollow thud on the pine treads. But by the time his foot hits the cold concrete of the basement floor, the blue tin of butter cookies has evaporated. He stands in the dim, subterranean air, surrounded by the smell of damp coal dust, laundry detergent, and old newspapers, looking at his open palm. He is holding a wooden knob, but the purpose of his journey has been completely deleted. He is an intruder in his own basement, looking at his workbench as if it belonged to a stranger. 3 miles away, in a windowless room on the 2nd floor of Hager Hall at the University of Notre Dame, a researcher named Dr. Gabriel Radvansky is watching a 20-year-old psychology student named Sarah stare at a heavy, flickering computer monitor. Sarah is participating in a study that will soon be published in the Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology. On the screen, she is navigating a blocky, 3-dimensional virtual environment made of several connected rooms. Her task is simple. She must pick up a virtual object, like a red cube or a blue cone, from a table in one room, carry it across the space, and put it on a table in another. As she moves, the computer screen occasionally flashes a question, asking her to identify the object she is currently carrying, or the one she just put down. Radvansky's data reveals a bizarre, consistent pattern. When Sarah carries the red cube across a single large room, her memory remains sharp, and her response times are fast. But if she carries that same cube the exact same physical distance, but passes through a simple digital doorway dividing the space into 2 rooms, her memory falters. Her response times slow down significantly, and her rate of error spikes by nearly 30%. The physical effort of walking through the virtual door is 0. The digital doorway is nothing but a few dozen lines of code, rendering a black frame on a screen. Yet, the moment Sarah's virtual avatar crosses that threshold, a small, quiet eraser rubs out a portion of her short-term recall. Radvansky and his colleagues realize they are looking at a fundamental, hidden feature of human architecture. They name it the event horizon phenomenon, but the world will come to call it the doorway effect. To understand why Arthur is standing in his basement staring blankly at a pile of rusted coffee cans, we must look at the physical limits of the human mind. The brain is an incredibly sophisticated organ, but it operates on a strict energy budget. It runs on approximately 12 watts of power, which is barely enough to illuminate the tiny bulb inside Arthur's refrigerator. To prevent itself from burning out, the brain must be ruthlessly efficient with its resources. It manages this by keeping only a very small amount of information in its active, high-priority buffer, what cognitive psychologists call working memory. This buffer can only hold about 4 items at any given moment. To prevent this tiny space from becoming cluttered with useless data, the brain relies on the surrounding environment to serve as an external hard drive. When Arthur is in his kitchen, his brain loads the local kitchen context. It makes the location of the coffee pot, the sharpness of the bread knife, and the yellow color of the linoleum highly accessible. But when Arthur walks through the basement door, his brain perceives a significant change in his physical environment. It registers the doorframe as an event boundary. The brain's internal operating system immediately concludes that the kitchen context is no longer useful for survival. To clear room in the 12-watt buffer for whatever new threats or opportunities might lie in the basement, it flushes the cache. The doorway acts as a physical delete key. Arthur does not know the mathematics of working memory or the details of the Notre Dame study. But as the winter of 2011 deepens, he begins to notice the pattern in his own life. He starts keeping a small, leather-bound pocket ledger on his desk. Every time he crosses a threshold and loses his train of thought, he notes the time, the room he left, and the room he entered. His ledger reveals that his craftsman bungalow, built in 1924, is a highly effective memory-wiping machine. The house was designed during an era when domestic spaces were strictly compartmentalized. There is a heavy, 5-paneled oak door separating the kitchen from the formal dining room. A pair of sliding pocket doors between the dining room and the parlor. A narrow pine door leading to the cold pantry. Arthur notes that on days when he stays in his study with the door closed, his mind feels remarkably deep, continuous, and calm. He can recall the draftsmanship techniques he learned in 1971, the exact smell of the ink he used to draw the municipal water mains of Fort Wayne, and the names of the 3 dogs that lived on his childhood street. His thoughts feel like a long, unbroken river. But when he spends a Saturday moving through the house to do chores, passing from the cellar to the kitchen, then through the hallway to the back porch, his mind feels like a book with half its pages torn out. Every doorframe he passes through acts as a quiet guillotine, severing the connection between his past self and his present self. By 3 in the afternoon, he is exhausted, not from the physical labor of cleaning, but from the constant, silent, cognitive cost of rebuilding his identity 15 times an hour. The true scale of the phenomenon becomes clear to Arthur in January of 2012, when his daughter Clara gives him a tablet computer for his 63rd birthday. It is a sleek sheet of dark glass, cool to the touch, with a high-resolution screen that displays news from around the world. Clara tells him it will keep his mind sharp, that it will prevent the gradual softening of memory that comes with age. Arthur sits in his green armchair by the radiator and begins to read. He finds an article about the history of the Hoosac Tunnel, a massive rail passage bored through the mountains of western Massachusetts in the late 19th century. He reads about the 300 lives lost during its construction. He is deeply engaged. Then he encounters a blue underlined word in the middle of the paragraph. Nitromanite. He touches it with his index finger. The screen flickers. The article about the tunnel disappears, replaced by a technical entry explaining the chemical properties of secondary explosives. Arthur stares at the screen. He reads 3 sentences about molecular structures, and then a cold, familiar emptiness settles in his chest. He has completely forgotten why he is looking at this page. He does not remember the Hoosac Tunnel. He does not remember the 300 workers. He does not even remember that he was reading a historical article 30 seconds ago. He presses the back button on the screen. The original article reappears. He looks at the paragraph he was reading, but his eyes struggle to find their place. The text looks cold, unfamiliar, as if it had been written by a stranger in a different language. Arthur looks up from the screen and stares at the pine doorway leading to the hallway. He realizes something that Radvansky's research team would only later begin to codify. The digital world is not a single continuous space. It is an infinite, hyperdense network of microscopic rooms, and every click, Every new tab, every notification, and every swipe is a virtual doorway. When we switch from our email inbox to a text message, we are not just looking at a different arrangement of pixels. Our ancient 12-watt brain treats that transition exactly as if we had stood up from our desk, walked down a long hallway, opened a heavy mahogany door, and walked into a completely different office. But in our physical homes, we might cross 15 or 20 doors a day. On the screen, we cross hundreds of doorways every hour. Every time a message pops up at the top of the glass, our brain flushes its cache to prepare for the intruder. We have built an information ecosystem that is in a state of constant, high-frequency self-erasure. We wonder why we can no longer read a book for an hour without looking at our phones, why our thoughts feel thin and scattered, why we feel a quiet, persistent anxiety about who we are and what we were supposed to be doing. It is because we are living in a house made entirely of doorways, running through them so fast that we never stay in one room long enough to remember our own names. We tore down the walls in our offices to encourage collaboration, and we knocked down the partitions in our homes to create great rooms, hoping for openness and freedom. But we forgot that walls were not just obstacles, they were anchors. Our memories, our emotions, and our very identities are tethered to the physical geography of our lives. The winter of 2012 slowly softens into a wet, gray Indiana spring. Arthur's pocket ledger is now half full of entries. He has come to see his craftsman bungalow not as a collection of rooms, but as a system of transitions. He begins to perform a quiet experiment of his own. He calls it pausing at the frame. One afternoon, while working on a drawing of a garden shed at his desk in the study, he decides he needs a glass of water from the kitchen. He stands up, walks across the wool rug, and stops directly inside the doorframe. He does not step through. He stands on the pine threshold, which is 3 inches wide and worn smooth by 80 years of footsteps. He places his left hand on the door jamb. He looks down at his feet. His left shoe rests on the dark-stained oak of the study floor. His right shoe is suspended over the yellowed kitchen linoleum. He feels his brain beginning to perform its automatic housekeeping routine. The thoughts of draftsmanship, the lead weights of his mechanical pencils, the radius of the shed roof, all of it begins to slide toward the edge of his mind, preparing to make room for the water glass, the faucet, and the clean kitchen towel. But Arthur does not let the door delete him. He stays in the middle. He holds the study in his left hand and the kitchen in his right. He stays there for 5 long, silent seconds, listening to the drip of the eaves outside and the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. He realizes that the most important part of his house is not the study, the kitchen, or the basement. The most important part is this narrow 3-inch strip of pine. The threshold is the only place where we are not defined by our tasks. In the study, Arthur is a draftsman. In the kitchen, he is a husband preparing a meal. But in the doorway, he is simply Arthur, a quiet observer suspended between 2 different versions of himself. He understands now that our modern tragedy is not that we have bad memories or that our technology has ruined our brains. It is that we have eliminated the thresholds. We have designed a life of total, seamless flow where we rush from room to room, from screen to screen, without ever stopping to stand in the frame. We have traded the quiet, necessary pauses of life for an endless, flat hallway where we are always moving but never quite arrive. Arthur looks down at the linoleum. He visualizes the water glass. He holds onto the drawing of the garden shed. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, he crosses the line. carrying both rooms with him into the light.